back to the show. If you've been tuning into the Prosperous Empath recently, you've probably noticed I've been talking a lot about romantic relationship recently, creating more emotional intimacy, redefining masculinity. And I think it is so relevant to the journey and the work of becoming a prosperous empath, because when we thrive in love, when we thrive in the bedroom, we thrive in the boardroom, we thrive in our businesses, we thrive in our health, and it is just so integrated. For that reason, I am such a stand for creating holistic success, because we do not operate in a vacuum in our lives. How we show up in one area of life affects who we be, and how we show up in every other area. And I have been having so many conversations of late with clients and friends alike who are craving, desiring something different in their life in the area of romantic relationship. And if that's you, I think that you are really going to enjoy today's conversation. Now, today we're going to be talking about unmasking masculinity and how to create more emotionally satisfying relationships. And we are going to be speaking about it through the traditional heterosexual lens, but something I'm always mindful of and really appreciative of from my Kundalini yoga teacher training days is that for many of us, we typically have a default edge or bend towards being more feminine energy driven or being more masculine energy driven. And we often could benefit from leaning into that other energy. So whether you're more feminine energy identifying or masculine energy identifying, I hope you listen to today's conversation through the lens that supports you, because there are so many gems in this conversation. And by way of introducing our guest, I want to kick off her intro by sharing with you something that she said during our episode that left me speechless, because it just resonates so deeply. She said, "The men who play small are the ones I want to have a lot more power. They're the ones I want to be leading and guiding and mentoring. And if I could support that, that would feel incredibly meaningful." And I couldn't agree more. I'm so excited to have my dear friend and colleague, Shana James, join me on the podcast today. Shana is a relationship coach and author with over 20 years of experience facilitating workshops on communication, mindfulness, psychology, and sensuality. She uses her gifts of empathy and compassion to support men and help them connect to themselves and their potential. In our society, men have a lot of power, but something I really appreciate, having worked with so many men over the past decade, is that they're also predispositioned to suffer alone and often struggle with emotional intimacy. So whether you are a man who's identifying with that statement, or whether you're a woman who's wanting more emotional intimacy with your man, consider there is something for you in today's episode. We're going to jump into today talking about Shana's experience and motivations as the rare female coach who works primarily with men, how to start seeing and understanding the men in our lives behind the masks and the facades of traditional masculinity. We're going to explore living beyond some of the traditional gender stereotypes and recognize that many men want more emotional intimacy and connection in their relationship, not just the women in their lives, and how can we all get more of it? We're going to dig into moving beyond the shame and the blame and the fear and creating that emotional safety in our relationships and communities. And finally, we'll touch on connecting beyond past resentments and start applying the nuggets of wisdom from today's conversation into your real life. I hope you enjoy today's conversation, and let's dive in. and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Hi, Shana. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to be with you. I was mentioning this to Shana beforehand, but I've been delaying having Shana on the podcast for at least a year and a half since her book came out because I was wanting to finish the book before recording this episode. And alas, I have yet to finish, but I'm sure I'll be inspired to pick it up after today. So Shana and I have known each other for many years, so I'm sure this will be a really beautiful conversation. And by way of getting us started, Shana, I'd love to invite you to share your pronouns and a little bit about your story, because I think we all learn best through story.
I love that. So I use she, her pronouns. And my story. I mean, I started, where do we want to start? I mean, I'm thinking of, the prosperous empath and business as well as heart and soul. And so, just thinking about 20 years ago or so when I started coaching and facilitating workshops, and many of them in the beginning, actually, all of them were for men. And I really got this window into the world of men. And I think as an empath, I started feeling and seeing things that the world, we don't often see in the world. I think most people don't see in the world, right? What's behind the curtain or the facade and what's going on with men. And I quickly realized that I could use my gifts of empathy and compassion to be an ally for men and to coach and support men to have relationships with women, as almost like a human practice. Because I found that a lot of men, I support men's circles. I think they're incredibly powerful. I think they benefit most men I know. And also men would come home from these circles or workshops and still there's lost in translation sometimes if they're in heterosexual relationships. And so, I started coaching back then and have been doing it for a long time and just loving it and loving getting to see and support people to have the lives and relationships that, are deeply meaningful and exciting for them.
I love that. And I'm actually thinking back to how you and I originally met one another. Mm-hmm. And Shana was a leader, for our listeners. Shana was a leader in a program that I registered for. And thinking back on that program, most of the leaders were men. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were one of the few female voices in the room, which is why I think I probably appreciated your contributions so much, because you brought a lens to the conversation that often felt missing for me as an empath.
Yeah, right. I think as empaths, it doesn't have to be women,
Not
but
at
as
all.
Empaths, right? I think we need other empaths and other people who are sensitive and permeable and just kind of aware of the many, many layers that we're taking in information on.
Totally. And I mean, seeing and sensing the body reactions and
Yeah.
the feelings in the room and the
Yeah.
responses and the somatic energies that aren't always caught by
Well said.
non-sensing folks.
Yes. Very well said. Yes.
And I guess I'm curious how that necessarily applies to your work. I mean, I think the work you do and have done for the past 20 years is really interesting because I don't know a lot of female coaches who have historically and principally worked with men. And I know that you're kind of bridging out from that. And I'm excited to chat more about that. And like, why men?
Mm, that's a great question. Well, in some ways, when I started these, facilitating these workshops with men, I started realizing that, in the moment we were dealing with these one-on-one relationships, but I started thinking about the world and the issues in the world, and that when men aren't seen or understood or cared for or loved or met, the the issues are big and dangerous. And for themselves, the suicide rate is 4 times higher, approximately, than for women. I don't actually know about people who are gender nonconforming or non-binary. I would imagine that suicide rate is pretty high as well. But so there was the self-harm that comes, and then also the domination and harm to the world that can happen. When people are hurting, they are more likely to hurt others. So I think there was seeing that, and also my own history of having a father who, my mom wears the pants still in the family, in that saying, and is often really mean and um, attacking and critical of him. And so, I think that all came together for me in a calling to be an ally for men. And I think I fell in love with men in some of those first courses and moments where I got to see behind the masks and facades.
What did you see?
I saw like vulnerable humanness and preciousness, and a way of, like, I could see the layer of protection and attempting to fit into the world and be seen as powerful and desirable. And that underneath that, there was what all humans have, which is vulnerability and, I don't know, a kind of, it's funny to try to put this into words. I think I just saw how well-meaning, and like these men just wanting good for people and the world, and especially men who take on a sort of nice guy role because there is so much respect for others and care, and wanting to be kind and loving and supportive, but then losing parts of themselves or shutting down parts of themselves. And I could feel that, oh my God, these men who play small are the ones I want to have a lot more power. They're the ones I want to be leading and guiding and mentoring. And if I could support that, that would feel incredibly meaningful.
There's something really heartbreaking hearing you share that. I mean, beautiful and touching, but also really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because it certainly makes me think of people close to me in my own life who have those relationship dynamics. And I see these beautiful men in heterosexual relationships who are shut down and disconnected from themselves and their wants and their desires and their potential.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. And, it can be very controversial, right? In our world, men have a lot of power, but I also know from doing this for so long that men often suffer alone. So, there are a few men, or I mean, many, if you look at, right, in the world, in the United States, there are there are many men who have a lot of power. There are also many men who are incredibly powerful, but like you said, have it sort of tucked away. We're never taught how to be powerful in a way that they could respect themselves. And so I think that tends to be the men I work with. The men who come to me, I think tend to be very empathic, very sensitive, very caring, and have often left parts of themselves behind.
So for your clients, I'm appreciating this conversation in conjunction with a couple guests I had on the podcast recently, because
I saw that.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you know them, actually, because you guys should connect if you haven't.
Yeah.
But we had a beautiful conversation about redefining masculinity, and it was with, two dudes who are doing men's work. So it's a very different perspective, but they shared some really common themes that I'm hearing you speak to as well, which is this really overarching theme around doing it alone.
Yeah.
And not allowing support. And so as coaches, we can't coach people who don't want to change themselves. And so I guess I'm just curious what the path to your clients finding you and being willing to open themselves up to support and being supported looks like.
Yeah. I know many people find it surprising that men reach out to me, and there are many men who feel like, there are too many women in the world, and boys are raised by women and taught by women. And so it has been controversial. But I think some of the men who come to me feel safer that they will be, it's funny. Some men feel more judged and criticized by women, right? Some men feel like women are safer because they can open up in this emotional way that they see women opening up, and they haven't seen men do it or haven't participated in that. But I think the journey is often when the pain of relationships, their sex life or love life, not feeling exciting or meaningful, not having the love or the sex or the connection or the intimacy they want, outweighs then the tendency, like you said, to not ask for help or not ask for support. I mean, I think I make it very clear. I think a lot of men listen to my podcast and come that way. And I'm very clear that I am a loving, caring, compassionate, non-judgmental woman, which I think is also more rare than I would like to see it these days. And I've had people recently too. I mean, since I wrote the book Honest Sex, I've had more couples come to me, and sometimes it's the woman who brings the partnership in a heterosexual relationship. Sometimes it's the man. So that's been interesting to see too, that there are some men out there who are more of the feelers in the relationship, or more of the ones who are sensitive or want intimacy and connection, sometimes because their woman partner or, their wife has shut down those needs or desires a long time ago and felt like they were impossible. So she was just going to barrel forward and get it done and do the thing and be the role, of mother and wife. And sometimes because she was never taught. I mean, I don't know about you and facilitating and leading workshops, but I was really surprised because I also created a series of workshops called the Authentic Women Experience. And when I started leading those after having facilitated for men, I realized the first night we're sitting in a circle, and I thought, okay, we're going to have a vulnerability circle and connect. And this is going to be a piece of cake because we're all women. So everyone's just going to be right in there getting vulnerable. And it did not go that way. And I was really surprised. And I had this moment of realizing, oh my God, most of us aren't taught that it's okay to bring that vulnerability and to be seen in more of those shadow places or the parts that we don't, love or appreciate about ourselves. So it definitely feels like more of a, beyond just the male gender. It feels like a way of our world these days.
Mm-hmm. I'm the first one to admit in my mastermind communities when my clients bring um, requests for support around breakdowns in their marriage that I used to be, number one criticizer in my own relationship.
Mm,
Because that was the way that I knew to communicate my feelings.
yes.
And as a sensitive empath, with such big feelings, like growing up, they never felt safe to express because many people in my life didn't know how to hold my feelings without trying to
Right.
fix them.
Yes.
And so the kind of the critical lens where I didn't have to make it about me, I could point the finger over there and speak to
Mm,
what was missing or wrong. And as someone who's so perfectionistic and such a great judge of what's missing or wrong, that always felt more accessible. And honestly, hearing you share that, I'm I'm really present that so much of the shift in our relationship, and I'm not solely responsible for this at all,
yeah.
but um, the change that I made was being willing to put down that critical lens and start speaking from the underbelly,
Yeah.
speaking from my feelings consistently and reliably. And I have these vivid memories of, wanting my partner to be the one, wanting him to be vulnerable, wanting him to share his
Yeah.
feelings, like, and yet I was so unwilling. I was the first one to point to his
Wait.
own inadequacies versus acknowledge my own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that really is what the book Honest Sex is about. The whole first third of the book is about honesty and how do we be honest in a way that creates connection from that deeper layer and vulnerability, right? Because you could say, well, like, I'm just saying it like it is. You're being an asshole. you know, on the one hand, I'm not going to say it's not honest that you're feeling that way, but you've then layered it with judgments and assessments, and it's not objective that someone's being an asshole. It's more of a conglomeration that we've labeled based on a set of behaviors, based on how it's impacting us, and so really going back to, if we want to be connected to a partner, if we want to thrive, if we want to have an amazing, intimate and sex life for the rest of our lives, that I believe we have to get to that deeper level of honesty with each other. And it's vulnerable. It's way more vulnerable, than pointing the finger, because then we have to actually open up about what's really going on for us.
Mhm. Well, I'm curious about that. So, for your clients who are more of the sensors and feelers and are willing to, lean into speaking from that felt sense, how do you how do you create safety in a relationship dynamic where their female identifying partners are shut down or are in that just that, tactical mode of what needs to be done, what needs to be handled?
Yes. Well, I've been finding that meeting separately and together with them has been really helpful, because I can hear from their female identifying partner, it's not private, because basically we're willing to share whatever they share with me with their partner. But there's a way that people protect less or try to, or let go of, I don't want to hurt my partner and I don't want to, all of that, like when they're just with me. So oftentimes when I speak to a woman, there's the layer of protection or some more of that control. And then I just slow it down and get vulnerable with them and ask them, okay, are you willing to look a little bit deeper and see what's underneath here? Because oftentimes I do see that when we're trying to control or manage, or when we are, um, feeling more of that tightness or rigidity, that it's not benefiting us either. It doesn't feel good, right? It's not a way to walk around in the world where we're like, oh, I'm loving life. It's usually a way to walk around in the world where, yes, we have a little more control or we're not falling apart, but we're also not having as much joy or pleasure or delight as we could be, or peace even, Um, yeah. So I think there's just checking in and going slowly and helping them see, like, I'm not judging and I am not perfect. And I struggle with my own desire to control and, all the feelings that are underneath that. And I, like you, had a family where it was like, oh, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. And I was like, I don't feel fine under here. And having to learn to navigate all of those feelings and to be able to see them in others and not make I never claim to be right. It's always an inquiry or a curiosity, a question like, okay, do you think there's more underneath that? I'm not telling you how you are, but I'm inquiring with you in a way that is compassionate and loving and, right, a lot of self compassion in there.
Oh man, I could make this whole conversation about me, Shana. I'm not going to go there. I do not have my husband's consent for that.
Okay, we can talk more after.
But maybe let's shift the conversation because you've been in this work for 20 years. You've been doing this for a long, long time. And I know that your work is evolving, and where you're feeling called and inspired has been changing. And so I'm curious what's been emerging for you in what you're feeling called and inspired to.
Yeah. Well, so I have a child who's gender nonconforming. And so it's been really interesting to be in a very, having been in a very heterosexual, dynamically created world and business. And then to see my kid who is just all the genders, all the feelings, all the, like, she uses she, her pronouns right now. And so I'm imagining that is part of what started, cracking the windshield a little bit on, okay, I'm just working, or I'm mainly working with men. But I also years ago, like I said, created workshops for women. So there's always been the past 10 years or so, there's been a question of when am I going to do that again? Or when am I going to focus on women again? And I kept asking the question as, I don't know if this is an empathic thing or a spiritual thing, but I'm often like, is it time, asking for guidance, asking for support. And it wasn't until last fall, I think. And then I sort of got that zing of, oh yeah, like even my podcast, Man Alive, people of all genders listen, and it's not really just for men. The topics I think apply to most people. I just do focus the questions toward helping men get the resources and support that they don't often get. But when I think about going deeper into humanity and in the course that you and I were in together, where I was facilitating, there was like a term we called shared reality around helping people really get each other's worlds, beyond gender, beyond, I don't know, beyond roles, right? This sense of what is it like to be human and what is it like to be human together? And that is coming in, I think, more and more for me that, that's so much of this. It's like, I know that there's a danger too in collapsing everything too much and saying, oh, we're all the same. But I think there's also pain when we don't see the humanity in all of us, or don't look for that, if that makes sense.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that we often kind of create these like implicit assumptions that if we surround ourselves with people like us or people with women, like there will be understanding, shared understanding. Yeah. And it takes planks to create safety in any community, in any space, in any family or community dynamic.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
I don't know about you, but I think about emotional safety a lot these days because I don't think I always had it since entering transformational work. And I've noticed its foundation.
Mm, I love that you bring that point up, emotional safety. You don't feel like you've had it like in a lot of the transformational work, you don't feel like it was there.
In some, it felt missing.
Interesting. Yeah. And as I think about that, and I think about working with people, whether they're single or in relationships, I think part of the work that I try to do with people is how to find their own way of creating more safety for themselves. I can't say all, right? Because I do think that there are external forces, or people can create situations where it's, objectively not safe if they're being judged or attacked, if they're judging, attacking, all of that. And I try to support people to find a place in themselves where, even if someone, not in a power dynamic, right? Not in a teacher dynamic, but say in a relationship, if they're being judged or attacked or blamed, that the person doesn't have to align with that as, oh, well, that's really who I am. I'm a piece of shit, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, right? That it's more of this inner sovereignty of, okay, and I can see that you're struggling with how I am. I'm okay over here. It hurts to hear you say that about me. And I can find that strength in myself. And as you're speaking to the emotional safety piece, right? Like, how do we actually create that for each other, whether it's a romantic relationship, a parenting relationship, a business relationship? I think that is so important, to welcome what people are sensing and feeling, and to not negate it, but to actually get curious and explore it. And I know that can be harder, especially, well, it can be harder in a romantic context because it feels more personal. It can be harder in a business context because it feels like, okay, we got to get down to work here. This is not real, or it's the soft stuff. So, right, we're working against a lot of enculturation to value that.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that distinction, that it's a both and, that creating emotional safety is as much about creating it in the relationship or the community, as well as creating it for both yourself and for the other or the others. And it reminds me of one of my, I don't know, one of the most simple practices that my coach ever gave me, that has made the most profound difference over the years in my relationships. And it is literally as easy as, when something someone says hurts me, to be able to give voice to that by starting with ouch.
I love that one. Yes.
Ouch, that hurt.
Yeah.
So hard to learn, Shana, and mind-blowingly impactful in the relationship dynamic and in the communication. Right? Rather than having to jump to defend myself, or shut their response down, or have an argumentative angle, to just respond from my own experience with an ouch.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Like the ouch, the pause, the just sharing this, the impact, like, oh, I feel like I just got punched in the gut, or I just felt my gut clench. It's probably a better way to say than I feel like I just got punched in the gut, because then it brings the other person in, right? But something that just acknowledges and slows it down and pauses before we get into the blame, shame, attack, protect, whatever, all those cycles and all the things we add to it. It's so powerful to slow it down. I made a commitment so I was divorced almost 12 years ago, and my ex and I co-parent, and we, moved states together. Like, we're still in it, and we have a really sweet dynamic and loving dynamic. And it took us a little while to get there. It wasn't perfect. So when I got divorced, I made a commitment to myself that was similar to okay, I'm going to say ouch when something happens like that. I committed that I was just going to pause and I was not going to open my mouth until I could say something that would either lovingly forward the conversation or create more connection rather than less. And I've not been perfect, but I will say that that specific commitment and the simplicity of it, for the most part, that it shifted my whole relationship with conflict and those dynamics because I could just, there's a Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space, right? And in that space, I never remember the exact words. I need to memorize it, but basically in that space, there's choice. And in that choice is the way I see it. It's we either go down the downward spiral or up the upward spiral, right? And so many of my clients are shocked when they realize that in just saying ouch or saying nothing and not going down the downward spiral, the gravitational pull, right, that happens in the downward spiral that disconnects people for days or weeks or years or months, or, that there's suddenly this ground that they can build on and become more loving and caring and connected. And so just by pausing or saying ouch and not adding all of our judgments and protection and hurt to that situation, it's incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. I never know where these conversations are going to go. And a theme that's emerging from ours that I'm really appreciating is this commonality around pausing or slowing down. You mentioned earlier around with some of your relationship dynamics with your clients, like you just slow down the conversation.
Yeah.
And just how much can emerge when we pause.
Yeah. Yep. I even had that insight with my parenting this morning, or actually like a way that I would love to support my kid when I see her interact with other kids. And, there's a lot of awkwardness at her age. She's 12. And I see her say things sometimes that other people sort of like bristle at. And I'm realizing like she's fast. She has a fast brain. She's hilarious, but not everybody's ready for that, And this morning I just thought, oh, what if I worked with her on that kind of pause and slowing down to notice what's happening, right? Pay attention to the dynamics, not trying to change who she is, but to help her have a little bit more awareness of when I say that, the impact maybe wasn't what I wanted it to. Okay, how do I clean that up? Or how do I create more connection if I broke a connection? Or how do I then pay attention for the next time to see, oh, that person is a little bit more sensitive or doesn't really do well when I make jokes. And this person over here, oh, we can just, make jokes and laugh till the cows come home or whatever, right? To have that emotional, relational awareness, I think takes a lot of time to build. And many of us as adults, I would say most of us are still learning that.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting how so many of us crave deeper connection, more of an inclination to lean in?
Yeah.
And it's that willingness to perhaps lean back and slow down that creates that very experience that I think so many of us are craving.
Yes. And I'm thinking of your wisdom before we got on, right, about polarities. And there's the polarity of kind of leaning in and leaning back at the same time, which seems impossible. But I think there is like, oh, what if I lean into being more open or vulnerable or pausing, right? I kind of, or lean into what would create connection. And maybe some of that leaning back is, oh, I'm going to slow it down or listen differently or get curious or, right. It seems like both are happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm mindful of the time and I want to honor yours. But I guess I'm just curious, maybe if there's a gem or a truth bomb to leave our audience with around like, how the hell do you apply this? Because it sounds so beautiful. And, I have no doubt that this episode is really going to speak to some of my listeners. And I would just love to leave them with perhaps maybe one of your favorite practices that you offer your own clients around how to apply some of these lessons to their own relationships, their own communication, and creating deeper understanding.
The one that's coming up for me right now is the simple practice of noticing, right? And just speaking and noticing so that you don't have to know what's really going on. You don't have to analyze. You don't have to have any assessments. You don't have to be right, but you can notice right? Or I seem, or I feel, or like, oh, I'm feeling defensive right now. Or I notice my stomach just got tied in knots. Or we seem like we're really rushing here. We seem like we're not sure if we're on the same page, right? Or we seem a little like we're butting heads. And using the word seem can be, I think, less threatening. So if you're going to do it for someone else, like you seem a little nervous. And then I always suggest, is that true? Or you seem like you're pulling away. Is that true? So I think it takes all of this sort of gobbledygookly like feelings and, nonverbal, some of the things that we've been talking about. And it just, again, it brings people to be able to come back to the present moment instead of sometimes past resentments and stories we have about each other, or future and fears and how's this going to turn out and what's the impact going to be, to come back to this moment and see, all right, can we connect? Can we be on the same page or on the same team? And from there, what do we need? And sometimes just the noticing, again, it's not threatening. It's not like, I notice you're being an asshole, right? It's observable. I notice your cheeks are flushed. I notice you're crossing your arms. Like, are you okay? Is there something going on over there? So I would say that's one of the ways to bring that empathy into the everyday relationships.
I love that you said bring the empathy into the relationship, because that's what I was hearing, how it's an empath's gift to be able to notice and sense and perceive and to speak it versus react from it.
Totally.
Thank you for that, Jen. Last question. What do you think has supported you in becoming the beautiful, thriving, prosperous empath that you are?
I would say valuing being of service, or, creating something that I think benefits people over my own fear and insecurity. Because I think as an empath, I tend to go inward with, is there something wrong with me? Am I too much? Whatever that whole internal negative self-talk is. And continuing to put one foot in front of the other and just choose, I'm going to be of service more than I'm going to listen to those voices, I think is a big part of it.
Shana, thank you so much for taking the time. It's so lovely to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.